Thank you, Joshua. First, we wanted to acknowledge the invisible workforce of women in unpaid care and domestic and work. And secondly, to help shift the way that INGOs such as Oxfam themselves tackle the issue and make it part of a wider, deeper process to make development sector work stronger, more accountable, and gender just, especially for women and girls. Now, we have two important guests in this very short hour, so I'll just quickly state the following quickly as framing points. We know from statistics globally that women perform 76% of total work of unpaid care work, more than 3 times as much as men. In Asia and Pacific alone, the statistics has risen rather to 80%, and that's according to ILO stats. And we will hear more from Professor Wadanasi and Andy Alani Tuipudilevu, who will contextualize that reality for us this session. What we can say is that despite this reality of this massive contribution of women to society, we're talking about double and triple work burden. This is not reflected in societal and state structures and processes, because in Fiji and Pacific alone, and small island countries, generally, there's no policies designed to help women in their lives and work, where if you look around, where are the free or low-cost childcare institutions? Where are the economic policies that support women to earn a paid living while carrying out massive unpaid work responsibilities? Where are the women in national decision-making legislature or in parliament? 1 woman in 14 years in Vanuatu, 5 women in the entire parliament of Fiji right now, no women divisional reps at all in the revived Great Council of Chiefs. Women unable to meet their contraceptive needs, with rates of 30 to 50% of unmet needs, a failure of society to ensure women are able to negotiate and choose when and the spacing of children and so on. So in this context, Andy Alani Tuipudilevu from Women in Fisheries will talk first about some findings from their local rural research as a member of the Social and Economic Empowerment Coalition in Fiji, facilitated by Oxfam in the Pacific program, Shifting Power, Shifting Voice. Now, WIFN was one of the 3 sets of findings synthesized in a soon-to-be-released report by Nolin Mbulube and I, which I will not touch on much today due to time, except to mention that it is time we saw women's overwork in society and state as first. We have to be better in articulating the problems. Overwork of women is a human rights violation and form of structural violence. And second, we can reconfigure many aspects of our lives to be more accountable to women for their paid and unpaid work in society, and build better policy environments first to help women deal with the issues of overwork and lack of rest, and come with better strategies as stakeholders, including in Oxfam and other INGOs, to address these issues, whatever the principal areas of work we're in. And Professor Wadan will then call on this massive set of economic work to share some ways better work on this issue of unpaid care and domestic work in the Pacific conditions and context. Now, the last point I really wanted to make is that feminist economists and others have been working on this for decades. And it's good to see more discussion, especially on the 5 Rs, the strategies on recognizing unpaid care, domestic and communal work, reducing this work, redistributing the work to men in the households and society, encouraging more representation of women on issues of unpaid work in all areas of policy and practice, working more on reward. What are the policies that help life be better for women doing massive care work, better childcare, etc., and working more explicitly on reconfiguration of states and societies, really being deliberate on the level of conscious change we will need to make on changing gender norms, work to end patriarchy, build societies that truly center care at the center of it, social provisions and welfare. So we will now move quickly to our speakers. We'll start with Andy Alani Tuipudilevu on Women in Fisheries, from Women in Fisheries, local and rural, doing local and rural work on this issue, and then move to Professor Wadanasi. If there's any time, we hope to take some questions and comments, so please think of those as you now listen. I'd like to make the first introduction. Professor Wadanasi needs no or little introduction. He is a well-known Fiji economist who has done a lot of work linking gender and human rights to issues of economics and social justice. He taught mathematics at the University of the South Pacific and switched to economics in 1978, and later became professor in economics. He was an MP and Shadow Minister of Finance in the Fiji government from 1996 to 1999. He's currently adjunct professor at James Cook University and lives in Melbourne, and he's also a musician. He plays the harmonica. And I witnessed him playing it, and he's a great musician. Andi Alani Tuipudilio is a coordinator of a really wonderful feminist organization that's really trying to build their evidence-based approach. They have been trying to put together an evidence-based approach to the work of women, the work of fisher women, and we're happy to have Wiffen speaking directly from their work today. And Alani is a marine biologist and has worked in rural and maritime communities in Fiji. She's a passionate advocate for women in fisheries and ensuring that women's role in the care economy and the challenges that they face in accessing markets for their products become key pillars of work for Wiffen in Fiji. So let's begin, Alani. I think for me, the question is, what are some of the key work your network, Women in Fisheries Network, is doing on care work? And to this audience, how many are joining us today? Around 32. Development workers, including through Oxfam in the Pacific and wider networks. What is it? Why is it important to work on these issues, Alani? So the floor is yours.
Vinaka Shelley. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the expert in the room, Professor Wadanasi, and also the Kakala Dialogue team for giving us this platform to talk about these pressing issues that matter to our women. I guess as we build up from the micro to the macro level, I will have to give some context on the work that the Women in Fisheries Network does. We will follow recognizing and basically documenting women in fisheries interests in Fiji. So in order to understand what makes up the women fisher, she's a mother, she's a fisherwoman, she's an auntie, she's a niece, she's a daughter. So in order to then dissect the different roles of the women fisher, we had to recognize that she is the main carer in the family for most of our women, given that they are based in rural communities in the informal sector. So while we were in this SEECF coalition with Oxfam, Oxfam then enabled us to then reach out and use the toolkit of the Rapid Care Analysis Toolkit to understand more about the women, to collect data, as Shelley said, build evidence-based approach. So while using the Rapid Care Analysis Toolkit, I think it was very important since COVID has just happened at that time. And I think what the pandemic did was really bring to the forefront the fact that our care workers are really indispensable. And in most cases, like Shelley mentioned, care workers, the women do 3 times more care work than our men. So what the pandemic did was bring to the forefront the fact that our care workers are really indispensable. So we realized we really have to get to the core of the matter, and that is collecting data on care work. Because during the pandemic, all forms of employment ceased to exist for a while. Life came to a standstill, but the care work did not. In fact, unpaid care workload increased during the pandemic. There's more pressure in the homes. Even before the pandemic, it was already 3 times more. So you can imagine during the pandemic, it would increase. So working parents and mothers in particular, they had to juggle. So in the informal sector, in the wake of the pandemic, school kids, the close down started with them. They started to stay home. So them staying home means care work for our women had to also increase the load. The burden of caring for sick family members. And of course, for most of our women, fishing, fetching water, filling water, and amongst other tasks. And these kind of tasks tend to fall disproportionately on women. So of course, they did increase the load during the pandemic. In addition, it also definitely affected the access to classes for young women at home. And in the rural sector, you have to finish your chores before you can sit down. We're doing Zoom classes. That ones who are lucky enough to do Zoom classes. Loss of income translates to a strain on family resources, again in the home. And in the context of our women fishes, a restriction on fish meant translated more hours in the home, meaning more hours to care, more people to look after rather than normal when people vote. And that's in the context of education for young women and our women fishes. Fishes are really dependent on natural resources. Climate change affects, in particular for women fishes, sea level rise, rising temperature, which affect the women fisher harvest and catch. Women have to go out and stay out longer to bring in food and fish to sell. Of course, this means someone else has to look after the children while they are out. But when they do get home, the chore still needs to be done. After the elongated hours, the extended hours that they stay out in the sea to feed, children need to be bathed. So climate change only adds to the burden of care workloads, not to mention the disagreements that pop up in the home because the women have been out for far too long. They do not care why they were out, just far too long. Fishing patterns and methods that have been built up over generations. These also have to change, or some of them report they are in the process of changing because of seasonal catch. It is being affected as seasons become more famous, oceans warm up, and of course, since the oceans has significant influence on our weather and climate, and the methods tend to be more increasing outside, increasing longer hours outside, bringing it back to the load of the care at work that still remains there, just adding to the burden that already exists. So how did we use the rapid care analysis toolkit to do this? It is important to note at the beginning that the rapid care analysis toolkit, it is not meant to find solutions. It is an analysis, the rapid assessment tool. It is an kit that helps us quantify the number of hours spent on care work in your target communities, which is, I think, is a very important aspect that Oxfam had incorporated. So this tool does, it identifies practical interventions in order to, and then the most important aspect that they had added into this tool was that extract the solutions from the women themselves, a very big and important method. So this enables us to just quantify the hours that they spend in care work at home and also on leisure. And then it helps us extract the solutions being suggested from them. Once they give us solutions, then we find ways of supporting them in implementing the solutions. Again, completely community-driven, locally driven. I guess the very basic example of what we were able to achieve with the rapid assessment tool was that in one of the districts, an average woman spends 67 hours on unpaid care work per week. That's a woman fisher, as compared to 30 hours for men. In another district, a woman spends 80 hours unpaid, while the man spends 40 hours. And for non-work, on average, a woman in another district, for leisure and sleeping hours, she spends 71 hours. The man spends 94 hours. We can already see the differences right at this community level. And this is just some of the ways that we were able to quantify the hours of care work done by our women fishers in the village. And then we were able to come up with solutions for them. Again, the solution is suggested by them. We just use what they suggest, and we just work our way and find ways to support them. Of course, there's ways of addressing these solutions on a more intentional level. Social policies, response to the crisis, it should be a great tie, the intent. This toolkit was also able to help us to appraise mental health levels during the pandemic. So things like this, while you're able to quantify, we are building the data. Hopefully, we can policies that would help address this. I think I will leave it there for now. And then if Shirley has more questions for me, then I can answer. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Alani. And just if you can share that published report from WIFIN on the chat link in case anyone is interested to read that report. Thanks again, Alani. So whether we're doing research from local, national, regional, or global, it's showing us the same thing, that women are totally undervalued. And we don't question the fact that society is not supporting women as they do the unpaid care work. So thank you again, Alani. And thank you, Women in Fisheries Network Fiji. So we're going to go straight into our talk with Professor Wadan. Professor Wadan Nasir will be presenting on valuing unpaid care and domestic work, unequal distribution of care work, the need for care work to be valued, the injustices, and his proposed political strategy, which may politically empower us, or rather INGOs. So thank you again, Professor Wadan.
Oh, thank you, Shirley. Bulawanaka, everybody. Let me just share the screen. Is it coming up on your, oops. Are you getting the screen?
Yes, yes, it's on the screen now, Professor.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me just start the slideshow. But before I do that, you know, may I just suggest something to the participants, that the picture that I am going to be painting over here is derived from the Fiji Bureau of Statistics national survey of all this work, paid work, unpaid work, leisure activities, and so on. And it's a very, very solid sample survey which covers the entire country. And if you wanted to, you could disaggregate by urban, rural districts, et cetera, But you know, it is absolutely important that you complement this statistics at the national level by the kind of perspective that Alani is bringing, you know, from her study at a very, very personal level, where they're in contact with the people themselves, listening to them, watching them, observing them, and getting their own personal reactions to the problems that they're facing as women and girls, right? So let's not forget girls in the picture, because that's where the problems actually start. So our two perspectives are complementary, you know, although in some areas we do actually present similar kinds of statistics. And nothing that Alani has shared, you know, this morning or this afternoon disagrees with anything that I have. In fact, the statistics I have backs up her picture completely. So let me do the slideshow from here, and I'll skip through all those slides where it says skim, because there's a lot of stuff in there which you can look in your own time, right? So let me just zip through this. You know all this already, right? Bulawanaka from Melbourne, and I acknowledge the first people of the Kulin Nation on whose land Melbourne is built, the clans of Wurundjeri, Bunwurrung, Watarong, Taung, and Dja Dja Wurrung peoples, right? I thank the Fiji Bureau of Stats, FWRM, Pacific Women, We Rise Coalition, Australian Government, Aussie DFAT for previous consultancies in this area of my work, which is how I'm able to present this the presentation today. I also thank the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, the Fiji Revenue and Customs Services for the data they have provided. And you know, without this data, you can't say things with the confidence that I can. Now I'm going to zip through this, but you can read it in your own time, because I'll send this PowerPoint to Joshua and he can share it with all the participants. This is what he asked me to cover in 12 minutes. Anyway, at the end of it, he was very generous in saying I was welcome to frame my intervention as I saw fit. So let me see if I can do as much as I can to help you. So these things you all know, right? What I'm going to cover, right? So I'm going to find the main findings on gender inequalities from my FWRM study, paid work, unpaid household work. I'll focus a lot on key strategies for Oxfam because, you know, in your communications to me, you talked about how you can work with other organizations to achieve these kinds of goals in reducing gender inequalities, which is one of the prime focus areas for Oxfam International, right? So I'll focus on that. I'll focus on key strategies for Oxfam to see how you can work with other NGOs to reduce gender inequalities and unpaid work. And I can tell you the progress there is incredibly slow and you've got a massive mountain to climb, right? I'll also give you a new strategy to go down, a road to go down to try and see if you can change the number of women in parliament. And I'm going to say 1 or 2 minutes, 1 minute on the festering failures of decolonization in the Pacific. Pacific values and values of Pacific peoples and some challenges for Oxfam Pacific. So let me see if I can go through. So this you know all, you don't have to say anything. Now Oxford targets, they also actually satisfy the SDGs, UN SDGs. So you know all these things yourself, so I'm not going to spend time on, right? Gender stakeholders, who should Oxfam work with? And I would like to emphasize to you, it's not just women's organizations, right? It's any entity that has the capacity to influence policies towards gender equality in employment, incomes, unpaid household work, and optimal use of leisure time, which I'm glad to hear Alani also talk about. So I'm talking about all government ministries, public enterprises, civil society organizations like yourselves, all donor-funded organizations, right? And basically anybody who can bring about change. So what's unique about this, I leave you to go through because honestly, there's an enormous amount of material and statistics in that study, which itself, by the way, is a summary of a bigger report I did for them. And because the FWRM thought nobody would read a big report, then I reduced it to that 50-page glossy report, which you probably have all got in your possession. But there's a hell of a lot more, you know, that's in the original report. So why beyond 33%? Well, if you want a statistic which gives you a summary of the extent of women's economic empowerment, although they are 50% of the population, they don't have 50% of the economic benefits. And they are only 34% of the paid workers. In fact, there's a lot of them who are unpaid, totally unpaid. Females, they receive only 30% of total income earned, much less of taxable income because females are not too much in the business sector. And females own only 35% of FNPF savings, which is what we can see in terms of monetary wealth in the economy. There's a lot of stuff which I'm recommending in my report that we get data from the banks on the ownership of bank savings, time deposits and saving deposits to see how much do females actually earn. But 33% is roughly where you are at, you know, in terms of women in Fiji, right? And I would like to suggest that all you organizations have a realistic target of reaching 40% over the next 5 years. You're not going to reach 50%, I can guarantee you. And in some areas, you won't make any progress at all because of patriarchy. So I would like to just mention that my data there is on, last data there is what, 2015-16. My tax data from the Revenue and Customs Services is 2018. Now COVID hit in 2019, 2020, 21. And I think my personal feeling is that women went backwards in that period. So the data is showing a better picture than what it actually is, especially given women's dominance in the tourism industry, which virtually collapsed during COVID. Okay, so the key findings, now I'm going to go through this quickly because, you know, Joshua wanted me to focus on unpaid care work, right? But, you know, he also said to me, you know, he had a throwaway line, please point out where there is economic inequality, right? So they're increasing the numbers in paid employment faster than males, but the progress is very slow. There's a high gender gap of minus 14% in average annual incomes, and it's reducing, but very, very slowly because women are finding work, but they're finding work in low paid incomes, not in the high paid incomes, right? So the gender gap is rising, in fact, right? And women's share of total income and FNPF balances is improving, but very, very slowly. Men and boys are doing slightly more unpaid household work in the last 12 years, but it's very, very slow progress and a lot more can be done. And there's data in my original report, not in the slideshow that I'm giving you, about the proportions of women who are working incredibly large numbers of hours, and Alani mentioned that, right? So in my bigger report, there's percentages of women who are working in paid work and unpaid work more than 80 hours a week. 80 hours a week. Normal hours a week is 40 hours, right? And if they're working 80 hours a week and they're stressed out in homes, husbands come home, they want food on the table, they go out for drinking kava, women are not able to provide it, and bam, wham, there is domestic violence, right? So there's a lot of stuff, you know, in this report, which actually can show you where domestic violence is coming from. Okay, so strategy A for Oxfam and other NGOs, right? You must increase the numbers of female paid workers, right? Now, there's no miracle you're going to have over here, because what it means is you're going to take women out of the domestic workforce where they're unpaid household workers and get them into paid work. And of course, there are going to be men who are going to oppose their wives going out to work because they want their women to be home, to have food on the table and all that. So you've got to have campaigns to increase the numbers of female paid wages and salaried workers, which means less unpaid workers. And it might mean fewer female housewives, which means you've got to have more house husbands. Now, can you imagine the revolution that's required to ensure that, right? And you've got to have campaigns to pressure the civil service and boards of public enterprises to set targets for gender equality in employment at all levels. Now, part of this problem can be tackled if you have more women in parliament as ministers, you know, which you don't have. And if you're a minister, you can tell the public enterprises under your command, I want to see more women in high places in your organization. Why aren't there more? I can want to see more women on your boards. Why aren't they? So a lot of what I'm saying over here in terms of your ability to influence the formal sector, governments and so on, is going to rest on the last strategy that I'm going to cover, which is how do you guarantee women in parliament, right? So that will be a very important part of this presentation. Now, private sector organizations, well, sorry, mates, you know, when it comes to money, they are not going to do anything, you know, to reduce their profits. Although my feeling is that there are studies everywhere in the world which shows that having women in the workforce and organizations makes for better profitability for companies. But try convincing the private sector on that. But we can work on the public sector, on civil service and public enterprises. Okay, again, equality of incomes for work of equal value. I see no miracles to be had over here. In fact, what's happening is that women are finding work, and they're finding work in low-paid work. Women in business, no miracles here either, but there are organizations who make a lot of noise, you know, women in business, so you can try and work through them. And my suggestion is that you can get government to put in tax incentives during budgets and so on for women in business. You know, they have tax incentives for businesses in tax-free zones, etc., in different industries. So why not for women in business? And there's one request that I will put in there, which is in one of the last slides, is that you've got to have gender disaggregated statistics on taxpayers, wages and salaried persons, bank owners, bank balances, etc. And you must have a gender breakdown, because if you don't know what the facts are, you can't see whether you're making any progress, right? So no quick fix here. So this is FNPF. Now, in my big report, I've actually called for women to register as voluntary members of FNPF, even if they are housewives. And you can call for government to give a subsidy, dollar per dollar investment into FNPF, so that domestic housewives can end up at the end of their working lives, they can end up with their own superannuation, their own pension money, which does not depend on any male for them to use, right? So FNPF is an area where I think women can increase their ownership of money. And if they have got bank balances, you know, sitting and earning 1%, 2%, I would suggest they go and put it in FNPF where the return is 5% instead of the 2% the commercial banks are giving them. So there's a lot there which you can read, you know, so I suggest you read them in your own time, right? Ownership of property. Now here you are coming up right against patriarchy, right? And you've got to understand how property in Fiji, both private and communally owned, how are they bequeathed to females and males? Now, there's a lot of work that can be done at the titles office in Fiji, and nobody's doing it. Now, my own understanding is that before colonialism, land in Pacific societies was passed on through the mother, because that was the barometer of genealogy. You knew who the mother was. You never knew who the father was. But when colonialism came in, they reinforced patriarchy, I think. And so, people, began to pass on property to the men, and control of property to the men. It's not so much so in Samoa and Tonga, I think, where women kind of still rule the roost in some ways, right? But in many Indo-Fijian families, property used to be passed only to sons and not daughters, who they considered to be their husband's property after marriage. So these are cultural norms, which is going to be incredibly hard for organizations like Oxfam to tackle. But I suggest you have it on your to-do list, because you never know when something may come about where you can change it, right? And I'm going to talk a lot about public media campaigns, which you can engage in to encourage the whole society to be gender neutral. And this is happening already. This is already, I can see it happening in the way women, in both indigenous Fijian society and Indo-Fijian society are now a far lot more independent, in their lives than they were, say, 50 years ago. So ownership of bank balances, etc. I let you go through it here. You just deal with this in your own time, right? There's nothing much that I can explain. Right. Come to the unpaid care work, which Joshua wanted me to focus on, right? When you add up all the work in Fiji, right? Unpaid household work and paid work. The extraordinary thing is that unpaid household work is 54% of all work by hours spent, compared to 46% on paid work. I mean, how extraordinary is that? In terms of time spent, my goodness, unpaid household work is more than paid work. So, you can, it's not all women, of course, right? Because, there are men who are also doing unpaid household work. And where is this unpaid household work coming from? Well, if I work out the market value of unpaid household work, and I just use the wage that people pay house girls, people who they call house girls in Fiji, which is the average of 5,755 per year, well, you get these extraordinary values of the unpaid household work, which is done by people in Fiji. So if you look at the labor force on that graph there, this is that gray line there, there's $971 million is unpaid household work is done by people who are already working for pay. Of that, 539 is done by women, working women, 432 million by working men. Housewives, leave that alone for a while because they're all 95% women. But students, you look at the amount of unpaid household work that's done by students, right? 238 million by students in general, 145 by girls, 94 million by boys, right? That's a massive amount, 238 million. Well, the sugar industry revenue in Fiji is only 150 million. And look, I mean, these are massive amounts, right? So when you add the monetary values of that, well, here's a graph. I leave you to work in your own time, right? But when you work out the how much income you would have to add to women in order to pay them for this unpaid household work, okay? Because Joshua asked me, how do you get society to value this work? Well, I'm doing it in the crudest way possible, which is put a monetary value of this. And if you look at total value of household work done by women, which is row F, right? Row F, 1,545 million. That's $1.5 billion. You'd have to add to women's income. You have to increase women's income in the country by 135%. You'd have to more than double it. I mean, my goodness, I tell you, that line that I've got there, it's not a funny line. Globally, if you look at what UN statisticians do, every year they have huge meetings and they agonize over small changes in methodology, which leads to changes in their estimates by 5% or 10%. But they don't do what they should do about women's work, unpaid work in the world, throughout the world, because even in Fiji, you'd have to increase GDP by 56% if you're going to cover unpaid household work. And something, this is something, your kids, sorry, no, you're not your kids, you guys would not know about. But, in Marxist theory, there was a great big field of work which says that the reason why employers are able to pay such low wages to workers such low wages to workers is because a lot of the work done to keep them alive is done by their women at home. The unpaid household work, which keeps the wage earner alive and ready to go to work at 8 in the morning. There's a great little Marxist theory about all that. Okay, so let's go to this next slide, which is gender's inequality in paid work. Well, I've got that right at the beginning of this presentation. Women are only 34% of paid workers, right? But they're 98% of unpaid household workers. 98% of all unpaid household workers at home. Oh, wow. So all workers, they're still 50%, but only if you count the unpaid household workers. So how do you have a strategy, Oxfam people? How do you increase female share of paid labor force? In other words, increase that percentage from 34%. You've got to move them from unpaid household workers over to paid workers, right? Now, in my big report, I'm saying that it's becoming easier nowadays because amongst the unpaid household workers, the ones we call housewives, there is a very large fraction of them who have got very high educational qualifications. They've got degrees, they've got diplomas, they've got certificates, and yet they're full-time at home. And I'm quite certain that if government applied the appropriate, subsidies and so on to childcare to make sure that these educated people with qualifications at home have somebody else to come in and look after their babies and kids while they go to earn work, the whole country will benefit. And I've got some statistics in my big report to do that, right? So this is the females' share of total work in the country. 53% of all work is done by women. And that share, by the way, has remained around the same for the 12 years from 2004 to 2015-16, for which I've got the actual hard statistics. In other words, it isn't changing, despite all your women's organizations, Women Crisis Center, Fiji Women's Rights Movement, Family, blah, 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 saying, we want to give a better go for females. Their share of total work has not changed. It's remained around about 53%, despite all that talk and barracking and advertising and all that. This is a very, very, well, I don't know. It's a hard statistic to cope with because what it basically suggests is that all of the efforts by gender stakeholders for males to take a bigger share of work have failed. They have failed. And why have they failed? Well, I don't know. The statistics indicate is that men are not, they're not doing more of the unpaid household work. You've got to get them to do more unpaid household work, right? Women, well, they did 73% of the unpaid household work. I think I heard Alani say 76% from her, ILO statistics. Well, Fiji, 73%, it's very, very close to that, right? How do you increase that male share, right? Now, this graph tells you where Oxfam has to target your campaigns, right? And the share of all household work, unpaid household work, 46% is done by the labor force, which is people who are already working in a day job. 25% by females, 20% by men. You've got to convince working people in Fiji, working males in Fiji, to do more of their household work, unpaid household work. You've got to do that. That's where the bulk of it is. Students, you've got 11%, right? But I would say, don't look at that 11%. Look at the fact that the habits that boys and girls get when they're in primary and secondary and tertiary education, it continues when they get to work and they become adults. You've got to start the revolution at school. No point in waiting for them until they become adults, by which time they're set in their ways, right? So let me give you some idea about where your strategies have to be. You have to start on male students, right? And what I've got over there, right, is some idea about the gender gap, right? The gender gap was 17 hours at female wage and salary earners, right? Employers, self-employed, the gap was 17 hours per week, right? And, basically, you've got to work out how to make all these people do more unpaid household work. So in my personal experience, I mean, I'm trying to put last 20, 30 years, I try to put into practice, what I keep spouting everywhere. So, I know that working males, all of us, we can cook half of the days. I actually cook most of the days in the week. I do less washing up. right? I wash all my own clothes, put in the washing machine, hang it to dry. Boys and males can do all this. We can clean the house. And if we all did this, just 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a week, and the gender gap is only 14 hours, you would easily release more time for the women and girls in your family. And my suggestion to Oxfam would be this, right? You've got to mount campaigns. You've got to mount campaigns for males to do more unpaid household work, Ministry of Women and Education, males be encouraged, blah, blah, blah. How about naming and shaming government ministers and top civil servants? Media can ask them, sir, how much unpaid household work did you do this week? And I'll tell you anything you like, they'll all give a big grin and turn their faces away, right? But this is what you got to do, because whatever strategies you're following is not working, right? Now, in 2013, I designed the content of a number of ads for FWRM to promote better gender equality. So example of ad one, right? Is a schoolboy and schoolgirl in the kitchen preparing the evening meal. Pick a schoolboy and a schoolgirl who are sports stars, right? And everybody will watch this ad, right? Working mom comes home, sits at the table with a laptop to do the study. Working dad comes home, starts cooking with the son. Girl goes out to play sport, all eat together. The boy and girl wash up while mom and dad go out to the movie with the children calling out, hey, dad, mom, be home by 11:30 and don't do anything we would not do, right? Can you imagine an ad like this? Example of ad two, boy comes home from school, throws clothes in the washing machine, hangs clothes out to dry, cleans up the house before the parents come home. Sister goes out to play sports, comes back, helps prepare evening meal with brother. And of course, all these characters can be played by your sport heroes. And there are so many that I see every week now on Australian TV screens, right? And man, an ad like that, well, I can tell you that yeah, those ads will really, really fly, and you might change a few minds. At the moment, they're not changing. So strategy on cover time, well, I think you need to have ads to tell men, hey, can you please reduce your cover time, right? My report has got some horrific statistics on how much time Fiji men spend on drinking kava or going to kava gatherings, right? So here's your ad, men going out for kava gathering, but promising women they'll be back in 2 hours. Of course, they never do until it's midnight or something. But the woman, a sexy woman with muscle saying, you better be early if you know what's good for you. Well, can you imagine an ad like that? So here is ads for gender disaggregated statistics. You read this in your own time, right? You have to have these statistics. Now, here's something that you want to think about, right? How many years now have we heard certain women leaders yell out in public, give speeches that we want more women in parliament, more women, more women, more women. Everywhere in Melanesia, we have this call, and the louder the women call, the fewer are the women who actually call it, who actually get into parliament. Now, Einstein is supposed to have said it's madness, it's insanity to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's called stupidity. Feminists would call it patriarchy, when even the women themselves are brainwashed into voting for male candidates who they think will serve them better. And I mean, in 2012, I had made a proposal to the Yashgai Commission for a mixed member proportional system, where half of the members are elected in local constituencies, the other half would be from closed lists. The idea about closed lists, friends, is that the party determines the order in which the candidates are selected from this closed list. And if they value women, they will put women at the top of the list. If they value youth, they will put youth at the top of the list, right? Unfortunately, that proposal did not fly with Yashgai. His constitution was thrown in the dump, right? And the government came in with their own, and you still don't have women in parliament, right? So what I suggest is that you can call for electoral reform. And this system is basically based on very much on what exists in New Zealand, right? In the multiple member proportional system, each voter would have 2 votes, one nationally for parties and one locally for candidates. So you can imagine 25 seats, right? So let me take you to this table. Column C is where all the local candidates, win election. Column C. Column A, the national party vote, gives you percentages of total votes received nationally, and that's exactly how it is in the current system in Fiji. And that determines column B, how many seats you're entitled to, right, in parliament. Very much the same. A and B would be the same as our system now. Percentage of party votes, number of seats entitled, right? And then you subtract from B, you subtract column C, and that last column gives you the list seats entitled from the closed list, which is where the parties determine 9, 10, 4, 2, 25 candidates will come from that list. And if they have enough women in there, the women will get into parliament regardless of women voters do or don't do, right? That list will be an important way, because you know in the Pacific, I've seen so many of my academic friends stand for elections, really good candidates. It's like Dr. John Fatiaki in this last 2022 election. What a wonderful, you know, MP he would have made, right? But did the voters vote him in that electoral system? No. So you know the Pacific is a terrible place for putting no value on good candidates. So this list system would enable parties to make sure that at least, you know, a third or 40% of parliament comprises women. And we have to change the system. No point in keeping the system, you know, when we know that it's not going to produce anything different. So I've got a Fiji Times article coming out tomorrow, because some people are already talking about electoral reform. Oh, you can go to this website here, which I've given at the bottom of my slide there, which is what the New Zealand people do. They're trying to, you know, iron out problems. They're still not perfect, but it's much better than what you have in Fiji, definitely much better than what you have in Australia. Okay, let me go to the touchy bits, you know, which Joshua asked me to talk about, decolonization, etc., right? So, well, you know, first thing I want to point out that the first Pacific Islanders in the Pacific are the Australian Aboriginals, 65,000 years ago. Why are they still struggling to get even a voice to parliament? I mean, they're in a disgraceful state in Australia. They fill up the prisons, you know, they're committing suicides, you know, their society is in total disarray with the domestic violence at a level you would never believe. And compared to Solomon Islanders, Vanuatu, Fijians, Samoan, Tongans, they're in a sad, sad way. So why is it that no Pacific Island is giving support to the First Nation people of Australia? And when a bloke became prime minister recently in a country, you know, you and I all know, I wrote to him because he's the chairman of the Pacific Forum. I said, hey, invite Linda Birdie, you know, or somebody, a representative of the First Nation people, to come and attend your Forum Island meeting. I didn't even get a reply from him. And neither did I get a reply from him about the need for Fiji to support West Papuan struggle for independence. Neither are they coming out with, you know, huge support for the Kanak people's independence in New Caledonia. And here's one point which I think people in New Zealand, Aotearoa, should think about. There was a case raised by Michael Field where Fiji people, Fijians, you know, of other descent, Indo-Fijians and Chinese, in Aotearoa, they're not treated as Pacific people by New Zealand statistics, but they're classified in the census as Asians. And when Michael Field raised this issue, I don't think I saw any support from Pacific Islanders for the discrimination against Pacific Islanders of Asian origin. I mean, God knows how many Samoans and Tongans there are with Chinese and, you know, other blood, you know, in them, and white blood in them. But when they come to New Zealand or Australia, they're Pacific Islanders. Nobody questions that. Okay, my last slide. Pacific values and the revealed values of the Pacific peoples. There's much in the literature that Joshua sent me, which seemed to suggest, you know, hey, you know, we want to get away from the big bad capitalist world, right? Well, I agree with you, because I've written a lot about the terrible inequalities which global capitalism brings about everywhere in the world, right? But, you know, just keep in mind, you know, that what you and I might think about the big bad capitalist world is not necessarily shared by our own Pacific people. And in economics, there's an interesting gulf between preferences of people as thought of by economists and their revealed preferences, which is by what they actually buy when they go to a shop. It's not what you think they should buy, right? So people talk about Pacific values as if they're totally different from global values, but I would suggest we have to be very careful about it. What are the revealed values of Pacific Island people themselves as shown by their actual behavior? So give Fijians, Samoans, Tongans, and other Pacific Islanders the choice of living at home surrounded by Pacific values, or to go abroad in the big globalized world, you know, in LA, you know, in Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand. Well, you and I know 90% will freely choose to go abroad so they can earn good incomes and sporting careers for themselves, their families, and relatives, right? they're not wanting to stay at home. And if you want to look around at the Cook Islands, right, there's 20 times as many Cook Islanders in New Zealand and Niue and Tokelau as there are, in Cook Islands, Tokelau and Niue themselves, right? And you look at the number of Tongans who are abroad, number of Samoans who are abroad, my goodness, you double or triple their populations if they all came home. So what should our education system prepare our young for? I suggest, you got to teach them the good values that you've got in the Pacific societies, but you've also got to teach them how to succeed in the big world of globalized capitalist economic systems while retaining whatever good they can from their Pacific value systems. Although my own personal feeling is it's a losing battle in the long run over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And we can look at our children and grandchildren in Australia and New Zealand and understand that they're very different from what we would like to be. They're very different from us, So I've gone through a lot over there. There's some stuff there that you might find interesting.
Professor
And this
Warden.
is my last slide, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a whole wealth of information and data that Professor Warden has showed us, and would be more than happy if you can share that slide, if you can. I think one thing that really stood out for me was the monetary value of unpaid care work at $1.5 billion, the total value. And so you put a picture to the unpaid care. So thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, both of you, for your valuable insights into a very complex and important set of questions on unpaid work and how to work better on this as part of the development sector, including INGO. So thank you again, Alani, and thank you again, Professor Warden. So I know we're running out of time. If my time is correct, it's 5 minutes to 4. Is that correct, Joshua? Sorry,
yeah, that's correct.
5? That's correct?
Yeah.
Do we have time for a quick question and answer? If anyone does have a question, I'll open the floor for maybe 5 minutes and see if there's any questions or comments. We only have 5 minutes, so please indicate in the chat if there's anything you'd like to ask the speakers. I'm actually using my phone at the moment, so I'm going to ask Joshua to please ask the question when it pops up on your screen. Are there any questions, Josh?
Not at the moment.
Well, there are so many people I can see in the names who I remember from the past. There's Tura Lewa. I think what's your mom in the Bureau of Stats, Tura?
Yes.
I thought so. That's your mother. What's a mother's son, eh? Yeah. So, any questions? Yes, Robin.
Any questions so far, Jesh?
No questions that are in the chat.
Okay, then in that case, I'd like to thank everyone. Just before I close the Kakala session, I'd like to ask the Executive Director of Oxfam in the Pacific, Eunice Watini, to say a few words. Thanks, Eunice.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for moderating the discussion. And I wanted to say a huge thank you to Alani and Professor Warden for the opportunity to come and give a lot of insight into the context of what we're working with in terms of unpaid care workers. Our society is it's mainly a patriarchal society, and our systems and structures are designed in a way to aid colonization. And so trying to address that in the work that we do is really important. And the effort should be focused on recognizing the value of unpaid care worker, redistributing care responsibilities, and promoting gender equality, and ensuring that social protection measures for care workers are included. And this includes policy, as we all have heard, and promote shared care responsibilities, investing in care infrastructure, providing accessible and affordable childcare services, and promoting equal opportunities for women in education and employment, and additionally challenging gender stereotypes and promoting cultural shift and fostering inclusive society. essential for addressing the root causes of disparity and discrimination in unpaid care work. So wanted to thank you once again. This is the first forum that we've had, and thank you so much, Shelley, for the wonderful moderating of the session. And again, thank you, Professor Warden and Alani, and for all the participation, for all the participants as well. Thank you so much for joining us on this session, and I hope you've learned a lot. Change starts with us, so let's be the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eunice. We'll close this Kakala session, and we look forward to sharing with you all the new synthesis from the work of the CEIF partners when it's completed, and also to continue this work to better acknowledge and work on issues of unpaid care, domestic and communal work, and also to make sure that we are acknowledging the invisible workforce of women in unpaid care and domestic work, and our responsibility to do better in our work on these issues. So thank you very much from all of us, and have a good evening.
I'll send my PowerPoint to you, Joshua.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You can share it with all your participants. Eh? And you've shared the original FWRM report, huh?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Yeah. Good to see everybody. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. And Shirley, I think I used to see you with Tara and them, was it?